getting crazy thunderstorms like I am right now. But I firstly, before everything, want to note that our WRJ Advocacy VP, Shoshana Dweck, would of course love to be here tonight, but she is actually currently being recognized as a 2023 Women of Distinction by the Office of New York State Assembly member Chris Burdick as part of Women's History Month. So just want to start with a big mazel tov to Shoshana. And, but yes, so tonight we will be gathering for a conversation with Rabbi Mary Zamore and Dr. Amy Beacom around understanding our own value and self-worth at work and as volunteers, and how to advocate for pay equity and paid family leave policies in our synagogues, our sisterhoods, and in our own lives. We hope you will come away from tonight with tangible skills to advocate for equitable compensation policies for staff and clergy at all levels, and to ensure that these policies properly guide the compensation, promotion, interviewing, hiring, and firing processes in your respective organizations. As leaders, we hope you feel prepared to implement sisterhood or congregational programs to empower women with tools to address the pay inequity they may face outside of the synagogue as well. The topic of this webinar came from a very personal place. I began my career at WRJ with Marla Feldman as a mentor, while the organization was beginning our work on the Reform Pay Equity Initiative. Intellectually, we were tackling the topics of pay equity in the Jewish nonprofit space. But tangibly, she taught me to negotiate in real time. By the way, it isn't the easiest to negotiate with a rabbi-lawyer combo, but with this, I learned so much and to never sell myself short. More recently, when I joined the WRJ E2A committee this past year, I was newly pregnant and actively advocating for my own paid leave. My employee handbook at the time gave me 4 weeks. I soon learned that at 4 weeks postpartum, I was still bleeding, I was not sleeping, and my baby needed me for food about every hour and a half. With thanks to some great Jewish nonprofit mentors and perhaps even more helpful state laws, I negotiated 18 weeks fully paid leave. I then actually ended up switching jobs 7 months pregnant and still received those 18 weeks of paid leave at a brand new organization 2.5 months into my own role. Again, with thanks to Massachusetts PFML, but also thanks to a few cool women who saw me as a whole person and as a professional they wanted to invest in. I am grateful for all the women and pay equity advocates who paved the way for me to even know I could have these conversations. So without further ado, I'd like to introduce our speakers. Rabbi Mary Zamore is the executive director of the Women's Rabbinic Network, a partner organization of the Reform movement for over 40 years. WRN has worked to narrow the wage gap, create safer, respectful Jewish communities, and promote equity while also supporting and advocating for WRN rabbis. Rabbi Zamore has been named a Trua Rabbinic Human Rights Hero in 2022. She is in the 2022-2023 cohort of JWI's Jewish Communal Women's Leadership Project, as well as a 2022 fellow for the Association of Public Religion and Intellectual Life at Auburn Seminary in New York City in the Oppressions and Repair Colloquium. And very relatedly, Rabbi Zamore co-leads the Reform Pay Equity Initiative. Dr. Amy Beacom is the founder and CEO of the Center for Parental Leave Leadership, the first consultancy in the US to focus exclusively on parental leave. Drawing on over 25 years of executive leadership, development, and coaching, Amy consults with Fortune 100 companies, international organizations, and working parents to transform the way our companies and country engage with the parental leave transition. Amy created the first evidence-based parental leave transition coaching model, which sits behind the work that CPLL does, and distilled the coaching method into the first book to be written about parental leave, The Parental Leave Playbook, 10 touch points to transition smoothly, strengthen your family, and continue growing your career. We are so lucky to learn from you two tonight. I'll let you take it away.
Michaela, thank you for sharing your personal story. It was very powerful. And I think one of the things that WRJ can be so proud of is the way that they empower not only their members, but their employees. And it's always thrilling to see both the lay leaders as well as the Jewish professionals who work for this organization, to see them just grow in confidence and in this very empowered setting. And it is a pleasure to be a co-leader, co-founder of the Reform Pay Equity Initiative with Rabbi Marla Feldman, who I know is on tonight, and to work so closely with so many of the WRJ leaders, and to bring together the 17 organizations of the reform movement. I see Sarah Charney's with us, as well as many other people have been involved with the project. And Dr. Amy Beacom may be a familiar name and face because she has appeared in many guises and settings to be a teacher to us. So it is thrilling to do this deep dive into this topic. We're very grateful for the very astute way that you have shaped the questions for us and even the topic itself. So I'm just going to start with linger for a second and some Torah text on the idea of knowing your worth. And of course, we know the most foundational teaching of Judaism that is, of course, very important for Reform Judaism, which is that we're all made in the image of God. But this familiar teaching and text illustrates that very powerfully. Simcha Bunim, the Hasidic master who lived in the 18th century, used to talk about carrying two different slips of paper, one in each pocket. Many of you may know this text. On one slip of paper, it was inscribed a saying from the Talmud, Bishvili nivra ha'olam, for my sake, the world was created. But on the other was inspired by Torah text, the Anochi afar ve'ether, I am but dust and ashes. Two totally diametrically opposed thoughts, and both very true. Now, as we walk the earth, you are instructed that you should take out, whether imaginatively, or sometimes even we illustrate this in the classroom and synagogue by actually giving these slips of paper to people, that as you walk the earth and you experience life, that you know which pocket you need to reach into. And everybody certainly has a moment when they need to just recenter their ego and have space for other people. And there are other times when we need to know our worth and recenter ourselves. And we also know ourselves well enough to know what our personality is. Maybe we lean towards one pocket or the other. But I'm going to add another layer of teaching, maybe one that Simcha Bunim would not have known, that there are many people who walk this earth with identities that put them behind the 8 ball. And certainly those who identify as women, but in addition, based on your sexual identity or your gender or your race, your abilities, there are many times in life when we are behind the 8 ball and other people are keeping us from our full worth. And our greater society and the structures within it are keeping us from our full worth. So tonight, as we discuss this topic, we're going to figure out how do you actually explore that idea of your worth, and how do you bring it and advocate for it, not only as individuals, but also as groups. And the Reform Pay Equity Initiative, we always talk about the fact that we're not only, if you're on the Jewish professional side, employees, but we're also employers. And if you are a lay leader, a volunteer, a member of a congregation, you too are part of the stakeholders of our Jewish institutions and structures. All of us have a voice for how we employ other people, how we treat volunteers, how we treat one another within our communal spaces, whether they're virtual or in person. So we'll take all of that together into this wonderful conversation. Welcome, Dr. Beacom.
Thank you so much. It's really, really wonderful to be here and to see some familiar faces too, and get to share this time with you. Rabbi Zamore, I really appreciated you also talking about the groups that sit behind those papers in our pockets, especially because I don't know if anybody knows this, but tomorrow is LGBTQIA Equal Pay Awareness Day. So as we sit in our Pride Month and have that day, so timely for our conversation, I think it's really interesting. It's a pleasure to be here.
Absolutely. So let's just dig in right now and talk about knowing our worth.
Mm.
So how do we know what our worth is? We often think of that as just one number, but my guess is that it's something much more complex than that.
Yeah, and this is a question I've grappled with my whole life, as I expect many of you have. One of the ways that I've always come at it is through research. I like to research. And I was thinking about this earlier of when did I get started with this question of what is our worth? What does this look like? How do we advance women's economic empowerment in this country? And I remembered that over 21 years ago, this was probably the first time I did something monumental beyond my gender studies undergrad degree in the 90s was in 2001 with a Jewish foundation that was doing the first real accounting of what women's economic empowerment looked like in the US. And it was through the Winds of Change Foundation. And we interviewed over 45 individuals in 650 organizations and analyzed what was happening in the United States around this conversation. And I pulled it out a couple weeks ago and was disturbed to find out that what we came to were the same things we're grappling with today, and how little we've moved that bar. But also at the same time, the conversation has changed completely. This was, people were not having these conversations at the forefront. And I'm very lucky in our work to work across generations and see that difference for these generations coming up, and how important and at the forefront pay equity, gender equity, parental leave is in their conversations and their negotiations. So the question though, Mary, is how do we know our worth?
Yeah.
How do we know our worth? I really appreciate you first talking about our innate worth and in the image of God, because I think sometimes our knowing of our worth has to get grounded in our remembering of our worth there. And then, of course, there's the practical. What am I worth in an hourly way? What am I worth in a salary way? What am I worth in a career way? And those things we can answer more simply. We have conversations with people who are in similar roles as we are. We look on Glassdoor or GuideStar. We do research and explore it and have those conversations. It's funny to be having this conversation with you, and such an honor, because some of these things on that side of this lens, so much better than I do. So I almost want to turn the question back to you. How do you know your worth? How do you explore that?
Well, I think about the group that's gathered with us tonight, and how diverse all of you are. So, some of you work within the Jewish world. Some of you work within the Reformed Jewish world specifically. Some of you are volunteers. Some of you work in the secular business world or the secular nonprofit world. So in some ways, knowing your worth, you have to know what your setting is, and then you need to know where to go to find the data. And you know, sometimes there are hubs of data. I'm very proud of the way that we've created an amazing hub of data around the 5 main professions of Judaism within the Reform movement, of rabbis and cantors and educators and executive directors and early childhood educators. And that's very important, but it's not comprehensive to all of the variety of professionals who work within our institutions and our congregations. There are other places you can go. There's a very robust spreadsheet that Dr. Sarah Shapiro-Plavin has spurred through her work. There's, as you said, Glassdoor. So you need to know your environment and know where to find the macro data. And as you said, you need to actually talk with other people. And I think there's always a good time to like check in with your comfort level about speaking with money, you know, speaking about money. And for some people, the idea of actually going to a friend or a colleague and asking straight blank, like, how much do you make, would be like the most mortifying question you could ever ask. And then, you know, most of us at least know Israelis or have been in Israel and are like, this is standard dinner conversation for some cultures, you know. So I think that's really important also, right?
Yeah, it's really important. And when you just are reminding me, there's so much chatter in the new moms groups and the new dads groups around this topic, where it gives them a little bit of a layer of remove. They're not having to ask their friends or their direct colleagues, but they're crowdsourcing that information in places where they can tap into a larger network. So that's another way.
Yeah, and secular studies do show that the millennials and the Gen Zs are much more attuned to talking about these matters with even their close friends or their colleagues or you know, these virtual collection spaces. So really it's more people of our age group that have more have a bit with it, but it's important just to take that moment and take a deep breath and kind of realize what that discomfort is before, you know, and not to let it deter you. For instance, you know, sometimes it's advised if you just absolutely cannot overcome that fear of talking to friends and colleagues, to come up with a well-shaped question. You know, you know, do you make more than X or less than X? So they don't have to give the exact number, but you get, even at WN, what we've done for members is, you know, I've done some micro collection where I'll go to 3, I'll say to the person, well, you tell me 3 to 6 colleagues who all have similar jobs. I'll send an email to all of you. If everybody who gives me the data, I'll anonymize it, and then I will send it back to all of you. So you could have a third party do that, but mostly I just want to tell people, like, get over it. Just do it.
Just do it. Well, there's another thing that's happening right now, as when we think about different generations, as you were just talking about, I can't remember the name of it. I can find it and send it as a follow-up, but if anyone here knows it, please share it with us. It might be show us your salary, or there's a hashtag that is making the rounds and really working as an advocacy tool for people to be transparent about pay, so that they're breaking down those barriers that you're describing. There's also, on the employer side, a big push to show the range of pay and to show exactly what that pay is. So that's another way to find out your worth, is to go into LinkedIn job descriptions, or, you know, do a search for your role and see what people are paying for that role. That can also
So we just emphasize that a little bit more, because you tossed out 2 things. One is transparency, which is so important. And there are many state laws, there are city laws, as you just said. For instance, New York State now requires pay ranges. And that's something we're proud of at the Reform Pay Equity Initiative, that we were able to introduce this, you know, in part in terms of all these placement processes many years before that it was even rising up through the states. So we feel like that's been hugely successful. But overall, that transparency, whether it's the salary range, tight salary range, we're going to say, not just some crazy $0 to $150,000 million, right? But a reasonable tight salary range is very helpful. But let's also take a moment to talk about knowing your worth, because WRJ is part of the greater project with WRJ Says Stop, is talking about sexual harassment, violence, and certainly both at WRN and we're very aware people can be in some very hard places to work. We of course talk about the kind of suffering people can have at home, the harm done at home, but in the work environment, people can be in very toxic work environments. They can be suffering from harassment. And I just want to take a moment, and I know this was important to you too, to say that the cost of staying in a bad situation has many, many dimensions to it. You want to talk about that for a moment, the types of harm that can be done if you are in a truly bad situation?
Yes. And one of the things that comes to mind as you're talking about this is how we're starting to see states add in safety rules around their paid family and medical leave. So for example, Oregon has this is not related to the workplace, but a domestic violence leave component to that. And so there's things happening at home or at work that could require you to not be there, but that's not exactly what you're asking, but that's what came to mind.
So for instance, physical and mental health, for sure.
Yep.
Opportunity cost. Why don't you talk about opportunity cost? Because I think physical and mental health is obvious, but opportunity cost, I don't think is something people really think about.
Yeah, about paid leave in particular?
No, about staying in a bad, abusive work environment.
Don't stay in one. The opportunity cost is, as we all know and can imagine, but we sometimes need reminding, you're losing your financial growth, your career growth, your social security growth. I mean, I think we forget that all of these little pieces add up to some very major impacts over time. And that's real. It's real. It also takes a hit on our confidence, on our ability to go in and negotiate a next level up for that next job. I mean, 2 years, 3 years in one place where you should have left within the first month is going to put you it's like compound interest, right? Yeah. You're just making it. I'm not sure.
You're just squeezing by.
You're just barely
right. And one of the things that we've become in our greater national conversations acutely aware is how many people live paycheck to paycheck. And so people don't feel like they have the economic freedom to remove themselves from some place that perhaps is not the right setting, where they're not being treated appropriately. But let's that is
particularly true around the parental leave timeframe. And so I think at any moments where women in particular are more vulnerable, that becomes even a greater fear and a greater impact on their decision making. And that's why we see people staying in those bad situations. And anyway, I just want to emphasize that particular time frame.
Right. And right now we've just been talking about the most extreme, but let's go back to more normative situations where we know that it depends which surveys you look at nationally, but on the whole, we see surveys showing women across all employment, right, in America, 82, sometimes 83, it depends again which data you're looking at, cents per dollar for a white man. And when we're talking about collecting that data, one of the things that you and I've talked about in the past is when you're having those more micro conversations, don't talk to people who just look like you. It's
Yes.
important to talk to a diverse group of people, and especially include white men in that conversation.
Yeah.
So that when you're trying to figure out, am I being paid appropriately? Right, that
Yeah.
you have that
Yeah.
you're using multiple measuring sticks.
Yeah,
Um,
I can I just share the meme that pops into my mind as you talk about this is one I saw a while ago that was a beautiful, luscious looking pint of red raspberries. And on the tag, it said organic raspberries, $11.99 a pint. And the and the meme then said, you know, when you forget your worth, pretend you're a pint of organic raspberries. Just channel that organic raspberry. That's just
that's great.
that.
I love it. I love it. um, so so we know the wage gap. And we know there are hubs for the big data. You can be empowered to look for more micro data to customize. We talked about, having a diverse, set of people. We're going to now jump to what most people think is an odd mashup, but you and I know better, which is paid family medical leave. Years ago when WRN started to dive into this, I remember a colleague saying to me, like, I don't get it. Like, you've been doing pay equity and now you're doing paid family. It seems like you're jumping around a lot. And I was like, no, we're not. Actually, this is all misogyny, and we're just tackling this from different facets. And there's harassment, and there's a financial facet to misogyny, and so there are all these different facets that we keep chipping away at. So why don't you just start with like the 101 for all of us of, what is paid family medical leave and how does it connect to equity, whether it's pay equity or other forms of equity?
Right. So paid family and medical leave, sorry, my screen just got a little funky there, is paid time off to care for yourself, a loved one, or to heal from a major illness or like a cancer, not a sick day. And that includes pregnancy, which we think of in our backwards culture as a sickness, as an illness, and it includes bonding with a new child. So that's
growing your family by any means.
Mhm.
And then also the dimension of the person who's a biological parent who's given birth.
Yep.
Those are all in this.
All in it. So if you are someone who that could include, if you're becoming a parent through surrogacy or through adoption, it would not include physical healing, but it would include bonding. And so, yeah, that's family and medical leave. But it's important to point out that while we're talking about parental leave, which is gender neutral term for all types of leave for a parent, family and medical leave broadly is not just about parental leave. It's caring for yourself or a loved one through major illnesses. So that could be elder care, that could be dementia, that could be cancer healing for, your spouse or your aunt, or it could be your own healing. So we've mashed up becoming a parent with illness because of the way that FMLA was created 30 years ago.
That's
this year. The
FMLA, federal law.
The Family and Medical Leave Act is federal law that provides unpaid job protection for roughly 56% of people in this country. The rest are not covered with unprotected job. And just in case, I sometimes forget, not everyone knows, we are the only industrialized country in the world that does not have a paid leave program at the federal level. We do have 13 states right now and 20 that have passed a leave law, of varying different levels. And then there's 23 states that have active efforts around that right now. But it's exceptionally complicated because those are all different at each state. So some state might have a domestic violence coverage. Some state might have 8 weeks of leave. So if you're a multi-state employer, it's a nightmare. It's just really, really difficult.
And it's not transportable, meaning if you change employers or whatever, unlike Social Security, it doesn't come with you. So there's a lot of challenge there.
Yeah.
So just again, put a little bit of fine tip on it, because people get so focused on growing families, on pregnancy, excuse me, that they really don't think about what it is to care for your partners, for your loved ones, for aging parents, that there are many other occasions when we have to have a caregiving role.
Absolutely. Many, many, many. And there, I'm sure that Talia will have the link to the WRN standards, which do create a benchmark of a floor for Jewish organizations broadly and organizations generally. And I think it's very important for me to point out, the Reform movement is the only religious movement in this country that is paying any attention to this. You are very, very real and tactical, practical leaders in this space. And what you're doing by talking about this through the lens of how do we practically enact it? How do we pay for it? What does it look like? While also recognizing it as a human right and imperative and moral imperative, and bringing that human piece into it is truly leading the conversation in this country. It is the first time that has happened in the US. And I think that's just important to recognize, especially to this group. So,
Thank you. Thank you.
No,
It's important. And I just want to loop it back to the arching theme here, which is knowing your worth. And I see so many people, especially women, who are, when they go into whether it's the work they're doing at the moment or a contract negotiation or trying to make a career shift, who have some sort of caregiving responsibility. And I almost feel like they are dragging a boulder with them, because they're dragging a boulder because of the assumptions society make about women in general, people who are female identified. And they're dragging a boulder with them because they feel that they don't have as much negotiation leverage at these moments, because they have to ask for what they need in terms of the family medical needs. And it's really tragic. And you know, in secular studies where you look at the wage gap, often at the beginning of career, you see it almost no wage gap, and then it grows. And then what's interesting is after it hits the broadest gap, that when women are at the end of their career, it often starts to narrow again when women are postmenopausal, because the assumption is that they are no longer like this, right, this risk of this liability. It's treated in this nation as a liability. And it doesn't matter if the woman actually
is even ever going to have children.
Have a family. It doesn't matter. That gap is still there.
And so I really believe the only way that we will close that gap, I think it's important to understand, I got into this work around this time frame because of my commitment to gender and pay equity. Like, it wasn't about babies and children. It was about women's advancement. And it's shifted and grown and expanded, but that is really where I started. And so having some of the things that we know, dads who take 1 month of leave, their partner's wage increases by 7% for each month of leave that they take. I don't mean their wage right in that moment, but that is an average, right? So that's that's amazing. Right? So when we start to understand that dad's taking and have an economic impact on mom's pay, but then you start looking at what happens within that organization and the way that they view their men and women. And of course, I really recognize the difficulty in that binary way of thinking. So I just want to acknowledge that. But the research is on men and women still. So we sort of fall into those categories. Those organizations will continue to either consciously or unconsciously bias towards those women until those men until they take and are expected to take equal amounts of leave. So until we really can say anybody's and everybody is a caregiver and they're going to take these in equal numbers, we will continue to penalize women. So I think that's a way to look at it as well.
Yeah, I think a lot about Judy Chicago's poem, that one day everyone will be strong, and from the dinner party. And I think about, as much as people who are female identified, for people who are male identified, they're also being robbed of their fullness of their being, and their full worth, right? It's also, we're really robbing each other in a way in our society.
We really are, Mary. One of my awakenings over the last year has been in my work with men, and having expanded our parental leave coach certification to include dads, and to be getting more dads that we're coaching and getting to hear in a one-on-one way what they are experiencing during this time has changed the entire way that I'm creating my business, because they are describing to me the exact same things that I've heard women talk about for decades now. And they're craving that meaning, the connection, the caregiving, the relationship with their children, the relationship with their spouse that deepens when they're able to be equal caregivers. And they're also fearing for their jobs and their career trajectory and their pay. They're the same things. And so we don't do any of us a service by not having our hearts and our conversations be gender neutral as well as our policies.
Yeah. And, one of the things I think is exciting is that we're talking a lot about heterosexual relationships, but there's actually a lot of great data. While we don't have great data about non-binary identity and how that functions within the wage gap or paid family medical leave, we actually do have good data in terms of outcomes of queer couples and the division of labor within family and caregiving and career advancement. And there is a lot of good data there, and hopeful data too, by the way, in division of labor and things like that.
Yeah. I just glanced down and saw a stat on my desk here that I think is also important to this conversation. Women who take leave, and this is back to a women stat, but are 93% more likely to be in the workforce 9 months to a year post leave. 93% more likely. I know that's, when I hear that, I can't barely believe it, but it's because they're looking across all roles and types of roles, which I think really highlights the discrepancies and the disparities we see for underrepresented groups or service roles or teachers. It's a real number, right? It's a legitimate study that I've checked the stats on.
And I will just add that because I've had the pleasure hearing you talk about this a lot of different forums. Recently, you did a wonderful presentation for WN Leaders about how paid family medical leave also brings racial equity. That it's amazing, like what a foundational linchpin this could be.
It's DEIB work at its most beautiful, and at a moment where it can path either way. It can path
Diversity,
negatively
equity, inclusion,
and
belonging.
belonging. Yeah.
Yeah. So let's like just kind of conclude before we go to questions and
Yeah.
linger a little bit on, okay, so now somebody knows their worth, right? They've done the research, they have the micro research. Maybe they're wanting to raise the issue of either their personal salary or needing leave in their contract or wanting to make change within their institution as a stakeholder. So how do you start the conversation?
There's many ways, but the one that I see most effective is coalition building. It's like anything that we know how to get done, right? We're better in numbers. That is not to say that individual people aren't doing this every day. Every single policy change that we have seen in a company, I was thinking about this at something I was doing a couple days ago. And I think that it's true that every single one has started from a parent like Michaela, who came in and said, I'm experiencing something. How do I do this? How do we do this better? What systems can we change? And so it's all with a passion and a spark and a drive to do it, and then making those conversations happen. The other way that, just expanding on that a tiny bit, is finding out and having the conversations with the naysayers, really going and finding and listening to them, truly listening, hearing what their reasons for no are, and addressing them really and with respect, and saying, okay, I understand why you would come from that. Let me show you what the demographic shifts are that are happening, what the expectations of the families coming up are, what our financial benefits of doing this are, what are, etc. I can't believe our time is already to questions.
Not fair, not fair. We have so much more.
We're just getting started.
So I'm just going to offer one concluding thought, which is I think a lot of what WN has created in the paid family medical leave resource with you and your team, and what we've created in the Reform Pay Equity Initiative as the third voice in the room, so that it's not Mary and her employer just having this conversation, but it is Mary saying, have you seen this resource? Have you looked at this study? Have you looked at this data? So it doesn't become the sense of me versus you, but rather this conversation over this with this third voice of authority saying there's another way forward. So that often is helpful too.
It's always helpful. And I'm sorry that is not the first place I went to, because it's so new. Like I was saying, there aren't other resources like that are publicly and broadly available. And so it's just a huge gift to the conversation and to the progress.
So Michaela, are there questions?
So I do have one question, but it's interesting. You guys have already started answering it. It was directly to this topic and asked like 20 minutes ago. So, but the question is, are we able to request or negotiate benefits like leave after you've been at a job for a while, which we're talking about, but maybe like the follow-up was, how do we do that? So maybe you can give just some super tangible, like, first steps.
Can I jump in?
I was.
Okay, good. So I'm actually going to quote one of our other experts that we work with, Andrea Schneider. I just spent a week with her, 3 days of her teaching at the WN convention last week, all about negotiation. And she points out that, first of all of life is a negotiation. We tend to think of negotiation as a very finite moment, but really all of life is a negotiation. And it's more like a dance than a fight. That we tend to think of it as this very confrontational thing, very heated thing. But you have the right to ask for anything you, within reason, obviously, that you want to ask for. So even if you're mid-contract and you realize that you are grossly underpaid and that there's someone else who's been hired who's getting a lot more money for the exact same position, or if you realize that your family paid medical, your leave policies are not appropriate, you can always come in mid-contract and say, can we talk about this? Now, the answer may be, no, I'm sorry, mid-contract, we cannot make this change, but at least you started the contract and started to say what your needs are and build from there.
And you can be building that if they say no and wait till the contract's up, and that you're still having that conversation. So when it's up, you can jump.
Yeah. And then there's no surprise.
Mm-hmm.
And again, some of it may be, if you're in the Reformed Jewish world, have you seen this resource? This is very interesting. Could we talk about it? Could we have the board read it? There's contract language in it. There's employee handbook language. There are frequently asked questions. Yeah. And in the coming weeks, Dr. Beacom's going to be, we're going to be releasing some videos with her talking in just short snippets about what paid family medical leave is and how to pay for it. So again, that may be something that you say, oh, could we watch this together and talk it through? So lots of ways to start a conversation. Mm-hmm. And but in terms of knowing your worth, to know that you shouldn't have to negotiate, for instance, for this human right and pit your vacation days or your raise or your job promotion against this human right.
Thank you. Yes. Another question that came in. What do we do if an executive director or board chair says that paid family and medical leave is off the table?
Explore why. That would be the first step. Explore why and listen. See if there's any validity, see where there is validity and where there's not. Sometimes it's off the table because there's 6 months of you can't talk about anything where our budget is too tight right now, but in 6 months, it might be on the table, or it might be off the table. And this is more usually the case because they don't understand what it means. And they don't understand that it's doable and affordable and easy and has great, great benefits. So that's usually why it's off the table. Mary, do you want to add to that?
Yeah, I'll quote you back to you. Okay. That one of the things that you have taught me, as a rabbi, I always go to the ethical imperative and the Torah teaching and everything that is the moral imperative behind why we should do these things. But sometimes just looking at the secular data of the business case for why it's good to do these is very compelling, especially to our lay leaders who come from business backgrounds and maybe the people attracted to board service and sitting around the table with you. Mm-hmm. So to look at the statistics that show about employee retention, there's always this huge fear of like, well, how can our budget bear this? And it's not that every single employee takes paid leave every single year. These are the most extreme moments in people's life cycle.
For parental leave, it's 2 to 4% of your average employee population would in a year. So just as a round number.
And at the same time, you do need to realize, like, for instance, if you have a institution that has an ECE, the people who are the teachers who are already grossly underpaid, I'll just say as an aside, that they need to be licensed. You need certain ratios of people in a room. So it's not just like, well, we'll reshuffle the work here, that there are real concerns. But during the pandemic, many of our institutions learned the value of having, for instance, permanent substitutes. And those permanent substitutes that were leveraged during the pandemic now are being used for leave scenarios. One of the ideas that we've been floating, and I know Dr. Beacom, you've been bringing it now to the secular world, is creating a fund within the synagogue that you build over a couple of years. And so it's not on one budget year, that the paid leave fund becomes like, and like, just like you would have a sinking fund for the roof repair or the whatever, the new boiler that you need in your building, that you have that. And then when it's used, you take from the operating budget and you start to rebuild it again.
And
So
one of the ways we see that happening is you're doing it over time. So when that person says it's off the table, explore why. Is it off the table next year? What if we start slowly building up that fund? What if we explore, do a little research on how we can get this done? Many states that in this, if you're in the state that has paid leave, you can augment with the paid family and medical leave. Yeah, there's
really
so many, and that scarcity mindset is going to be there always. I've heard Mary speak about this. And sorry, I just keep defaulting to Mary, but Rabbi Zamore,
We're all twins. Okay.
that there's always something. There's, interest rates. Are they going to go up or down tomorrow? Today, is the stock market going to do this? Are we going to get the right grants? Are we going to have our congregations donate at this certain level this year? You're always going to run into these budget questions. So sort of thinking of them as noise and just keep forging ahead.
Yeah, and realizing that an institution that supports equity it has a solid foundation, and that you're going to be having happy employees. You're going to have employees who are engaged, present, and that makes for a better functioning community.
Thank you. I think one more question before we bring Trina on to close us out. But as lay leaders, as volunteers, board members, sisterhood presidents, how would you suggest we start the conversation in our spaces?
So one of the things I've said since the early days of the Reform Pay Equity Initiative is, don't ask, are we paying our employees fairly? The question is, how do we know we're doing the right thing by our employees? How do we know? So are we, just as the employee wants to look at all the data, those hubs of data, you want to be looking at the data. You want to be reading the articles that we've published that explain the issues and bring all the data together and show both the challenges and the strengths that we have to make this change. This is a change. There's so many things, when we look at climate change and hunger in the world. I mean, there are things that are truly overwhelming, but this is something we all control and we can make the change.
Absolutely. I could say one little thing on that. Often the people who are most effective at bringing this forward and have the most credibility with the organization are the ones that do not benefit from it themselves. And so I think that the lay leaders are in a very unique position in these situations because of that, because they're not asking for paid leave for themselves. They're advocating for it to be the thing that is done. I just wanted to add that.
Well said.
Thank you both so much. I'm going to hand it over to Trina.
Thank you, Michaela. Hi, I'm Trina Novak, co-chair of WRJ's Social Justice Committee, Education to Action, or E2A. Thank you for joining us tonight. I want to express our deep gratitude to and appreciation for our speakers, Rabbi Mary Zamore and Dr. Amy Beacom. You have given us a lot to think about, including strategies to advocate for ourselves and others. Additional thank yous go to Michaela Scheinheit for helping to coordinate this webinar and for sharing some of her story, to our staff partner, Talia Shapiro Blank, for taking care of everything, and to our communications and Zoom helper tonight, Elisa Heisman. Thank you to the Women's Rabbinic Network and the Reform Pay Equity Initiative for co-sponsoring tonight's webinar, reflecting the power of our lay professional partnerships to make change and to drive towards equity, equipped with knowledge of our own worth every step of the way. Links to the resources on the screen will be sent in a follow-up email. Next slide, please. We have some upcoming programs we want to highlight. WRJ is co-sponsoring a commemoration of the first anniversary of the Dobbs decision on June 23rd. And we have a virtual Lilith Salon on July 12th. The spring issue of Lilith shares deeply moving stories of caregiving and survival. And we expect that the discussion, which will be led by Susan Singer, will be powerful. And don't forget to add your name to the list for the WRJ Says Stop webinar, which will be on December 4th. Please note the new date. As we move from education tonight into action, we hope you will visit the resource and program sites, peruse the materials, and raise these issues both for yourselves and on behalf of others in our communal spaces. And the first action you can take, please respond to the survey that we will be sending out along with the recording of tonight's fireside chat. Thank you for coming again and have a great evening.